found the most American neighborhood.
Someone who grew up in Europe, especially in Germany, there's something so cool about American suburbs, and I don't think Americans are realizing that.
Are British people so obsessed with American?
Most American houses in these films look like this, and I'm
a Brit living in Las Vegas, and these are the biggest culture shocks I've experienced in my neighborhood.
Why do so many Europeans land in America convinced they already know exactly what they're going to find, and then spend the rest of their trip quietly rewriting everything they believed? That question sits at the center of one of the strangest cultural shifts to come out of the build-up to the World Cup. And if you want more videos like this one, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on notifications now, because this is only the beginning of a much bigger conversation. For years, the script was simple. Europe was the sophisticated one, the historic one, the one with the trains that run on time and the cities built for walking. America was the loud cousin, big trucks, bigger meals, a country that supposedly traded culture for convenience. Then the World Cup started pulling hundreds of thousands of European fans across the Atlantic, and something happened that nobody on either side of the ocean fully expected. The stereotypes didn't survive contact with the real thing.
I would miss it so much, my God.
Yeah, we're having withdrawal symptoms, and we wanted to just quickly stick on here and just obviously video diary that, because I think it's important for our journey when we're moving to America for us to keep track of what were we like when we lived here.
Start with the part almost nobody predicted, the sheer disarming warmth of strangers. Europeans arriving in American host cities kept describing the same pattern over and over in videos and posts and travel forums, as if they'd stumbled onto some kind of open secret. A group of visiting fans would be standing outside a stadium trying to figure out parking or transit, looking a little lost the way tourists do everywhere, and within minutes, a local would walk over, unprompted, and simply start helping. Not because anyone asked, not because there was anything in it for them, just because that's what you do when you see someone who looks like they need a hand. One traveling supporter described being at a diner the morning after a match, still buzzing from the night before, only to be told by the server that someone at another table had already covered the bill and left before anyone could even say thank you. It's the kind of gesture that barely registers as unusual in parts of America. And yet, for a visitor raised on a diet of polite European reserve, it landed like something out of a movie. Then there's the human side of American law enforcement, which shocked plenty of visitors who came in braced for something closer to what they'd seen in the news back home. Instead, fans described officers posted outside fan zones cracking jokes, posing for photos, high-fiving kids, occasionally getting playfully heckled by a crowd of supporters in another team's colors, and just laughing it off. One Scottish fan account that circulated widely described an officer directing traffic near a stadium who took a break from the job just to teach a small group of visiting supporters how to properly pronounce a few American slang terms, turning a mundane logistics problem into a genuinely funny memory of the trip. A German visitor separately described a shopkeeper who, noticing a group of tourists counting out unfamiliar currency, simply waved off the difference and told them to worry about it next time.
Someone who grew up in Europe, especially in Germany, there's something so cool about American suburbs, and I don't think Americans are realizing that. For me, this really feels like I'm walking through a movie set. And I know that doesn't make sense for a lot of people who grew up here, but I get so excited every time I see a yellow school bus, or these long drives away with the basketball hubs, or even these random sidewalks as I'm walking here right now. So please tell me I'm not the only one.
None of these moments make headlines. They're too small for that. But collected together, across thousands of individual encounters, they start to paint a picture that doesn't match the version of America that gets exported through crime documentaries and news segments. Would you rather live somewhere colder, but more polished, or somewhere rougher around the edges, but where strangers actually go out of their way for you? That's the question a lot of these visitors say they found themselves quietly asking on the flight home. Because it isn't just the people, it's the sheer physical scale of the place, and how that scale gets treated as completely unremarkable by the people who live there. European visitors kept fixating on things that Americans don't even think to notice anymore. The gas stations, for one. Not the cramped, single-pump stops most Europeans are used to, but sprawling travel centers the size of small department stores, stacked wall-to-wall with snacks, drinks, merchandise, and clean restrooms that could double as rest stops on their own. One Dutch fan filmed himself walking the length of a single travel center parking lot and joked that it was longer than the block his apartment building sat on back home. Supermarkets got the same treatment. Aisles that stretch far enough that carts start to feel like a genuine transportation decision. Refrigerated sections the size of entire European corner stores, and a sheer volume of choice that left more than one visitor standing frozen in front of a wall of cereal, unsure whether to laugh or feel a little overwhelmed. Portion sizes became their own running joke across dozens of reaction videos. A French couple ordering what they assumed was a personal appetizer and getting served something that could have fed their entire table back home. A British fan holding up a fountain drink cup nearly the size of his forearm and asking, half serious, whether refills were technically infinite. It's easy to write these moments off as comedy, and they are funny. But underneath the joke is something more interesting. An entire culture built around abundance as a kind of quiet confidence, where bigger isn't showing off, it's just the baseline. The highways tell the same story in a different key. 10, 12, sometimes 16 lanes of interstate, moving in total organization. Trucks the size of small houses hauling goods across distances most Europeans only associate with international travel. All of it running with a kind of unbothered efficiency that visitors kept describing as strangely hypnotic to watch from the window of a rental car. And then there's the land itself, which is where a lot of European assumptions really started to buckle. Plenty of visiting fans built extra days around a national park visit, expecting something scenic but manageable, the way a well-loved European nature reserve might be manageable. What they found instead were landscapes so vast that entire drives between viewpoints stretched into hours, canyons and mountain ranges that made phone cameras feel almost useless, and a sense of scale that made even seasoned travelers go quiet for a second. A Swedish fan described standing at the edge of a canyon overlook and realizing that the drop in front of him was deeper than the tallest building he'd ever stood on top of back home. Time zones added their own layer of disorientation. More than one European supporter admitted they genuinely lost track of what time it was in their own home country, because the sheer physical distance between one host city and another felt less like crossing a country and more like crossing a continent. Wildlife sightings, too, kept showing up in travel logs almost as an afterthought. A deer wandering near a hotel parking lot, a hawk circling over a highway rest stop, Small reminders that even the developed, paved-over version of America still has a wildness sitting just underneath it.
This has got to be one of the most American-looking neighborhoods I have ever seen. When I was younger and I pictured America in my head, this is exactly what I saw. Huge open roads, beautiful houses, so much space. I would have loved to have grown up.
Safety was maybe the single most contested stereotype going in, and also the one that visitors seemed most eager to talk about once they got home. The pre-trip narrative, shaped by years of news coverage, painted American cities as dangerous, chaotic, a little bit of a gamble. What a huge number of fans actually experienced was clean, orderly fan zones, crowd control that felt calm rather than tense, and a visible police presence that read as protective rather than intimidating. One English supporter described walking back to a hotel well past midnight through a downtown area he'd been warned to avoid, and finding it not just safe, but almost sleepy. Families still out, restaurants still lit up, nothing resembling the danger he'd been told to expect. That's not to say every American city or every neighborhood fits that description, and the fans who said this weren't claiming it does. But the gap between the expectation and the lived experience was wide enough that it became one of the most repeated talking points across the entire tournament. Would you rather trust the headlines or trust what you actually see with your own eyes once you're standing there? A lot of these travelers came away saying the second one changed their mind more than they expected it to. Money is where things get more complicated and more personal. Several visiting fans who got to talking with American workers, servers, rideshare drivers, stadium staff, came away with a mixed picture rather than a simple one. Wages in some service jobs, especially with tips factored in, could genuinely surprise a European used to lower base pay but stronger built-in benefits. At the same time, the absence of the safety net Europeans take for granted came up constantly. One American worker, chatting with a group of visiting supporters between shifts, described skipping a doctor's visit for a nagging issue simply because the cost of dealing with it properly felt too disruptive to plan around. A kind of calculation that barely registers as a decision for someone coming from a country with universal health care. Housing came up just as often. A few fans, comparing notes with locals, were struck by how much further a similar income seemed to stretch in certain American cities when it came to space, square footage, and the sheer size of an average home, even as they acknowledged that other American cities had become just as brutally expensive as anything in Western Europe. The picture that emerged wasn't better or worse, so much as a completely different set of trade-offs, freedom and flexibility bought at the cost of a much thinner cushion underneath. Then there's the part that's harder to put into words but somehow the easiest to feel the moment you land. The sheer, unguarded patriotism. Flags on porches, flags on truck beds, flags painted onto the sides of barns and towns most visitors had never heard of before their flight landed. The national anthem before matches hit differently in person than it does on a broadcast, with entire sections of a stadium going still and serious in a way that a few visiting fans admitted made them a little emotional despite themselves. One Dutch supporter described watching a small town's 4th of July-style display of pride spill over into the World Cup atmosphere, strangers linking arms during the anthem. A level of unself-conscious national feeling that felt almost foreign to visitors from countries where overt patriotism can carry more complicated baggage. It's not that Europeans don't love their countries. It's that the volume and openness of it in America, the sheer lack of embarrassment about it, kept catching people off guard. Food culture rounded out the experience in ways that were smaller but just as memorable. Regional specialties became their own mini pilgrimage for some fans, chasing down a specific style of barbecue in one city, a particular approach to smoked meat in another, comparing notes online about which region did it best, like it was its own bracket competition running alongside the actual tournament. Drive-through culture fascinated more than a few visitors who'd never experienced ordering, paying, and eating a full meal without leaving their car. Tipping culture, on the other hand, tripped people up constantly, with more than one European fan admitting on camera that they'd undertipped early in the trip simply because the percentage-based, semi-mandatory system doesn't really have an equivalent back home, and having to learn it on the fly became its own recurring, slightly embarrassed bit of comic relief across dozens of travel vlogs. By the time the tournament wound down, a pattern had become impossible to ignore. Fans who'd arrived skeptical, some of them openly dismissive in their pre-trip content, kept posting follow-up videos that amounted to a kind of public walking back. Not a total reversal. Nobody was claiming America had no problems, but a genuine, repeated admission that the country they experienced didn't match the country they'd been told about. A British fan who'd made jokes before the trip about American food and American friendliness posted a follow-up, practically apologizing to his own audience, saying the hospitality alone had rewritten his entire mental picture of the place. A French traveler admitted the scale of the country had made her feel, for the first time, like she understood why Americans think about distance and time so differently. Over and over, the arc was the same. Arrive with a stereotype. Leave with a story that complicates it. So here's the question worth sitting with. Would you rather live in a place that's smaller, more polished, more historically tidy, or a place that's bigger, messier, and somehow still finds room for that much warmth toward total strangers? There's no clean right answer, and that's kind of the point. If this kind of cultural contrast, the real stories underneath the stereotypes, is something you want more of, this is exactly the kind of series to stick around for. So like this video, share it with someone who'd argue with you about it, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Before you go, a quick, honest note. This video is a compilation drawn from public social media posts, traveler reaction videos, and general reporting around the World Cup 2026 travel season, put together for entertainment and discussion rather than as a scientific study of either continent. It doesn't capture the full social reality of any city, region, or country, and it isn't a statement of official policy or a universal truth about anyone's experience. Individual stories referenced here are individual stories, not a stand-in for everyone's experience in America or Europe. Treat it as a starting point for conversation, not a final verdict, and make your own decisions with your own information rather than based on any single video, including this one.